What's up, gamers? My name's Scyushi and we're back again some more Trove, and today we're going to be doing that long overdue tutorial talking about shadow towers. So you guys have actually been requesting this for quite a while, just because my most recent video talking about shadow towers is already pretty old at this point. Honestly speaking, there hasn't really been that much that's changed with shadow towers. I'm not going to end up highlighting all of the different costumes and nuances of absolutely everything to do with the shadow towers. I do want this to be a definitive guide for shadow towers, but I already have other videos that show off all the costumes and stuff, so hopefully that's okay with you guys. Oh, and excuse me for editing this clip in later. I completely forgot to talk about it, but if you're new to Trove, you can use that sign up link in the description, and then anything that you end up buying out of the cash shop, I'll end up making a percentage of that, which is really helpful to me, especially in these times where YouTube isn't paying as much as it once was. First and foremost, shadow towers, how do you get to them? Well, you can end up opening up the Trovian Atlas. That's Control A on PC, or where is it? It'll end up being then this menu that's behind my face right here on console, which you simply put are going to end up going over into this right here. The moon up at the top, even though it looks the same as all of these warp icons, it always just tricks me. Anybody else get tricked by this? It just seems kind of awkward for the top of this to end up being the same or a very similar icon. But anyways, you go here, click enter, you're going to end up warping into the shadow tower lobby, I guess it would be called. It's automatically going to throw you into the shadow tower chat, so you can actually use that to talk with other players that are trying to go through shadow towers. Now, there is a much easier way of actually entering shadow towers in your club worlds and stuff like that, but we'll talk about that in a bit, because first we're just going to talk about what shadow towers are as a whole. So each of these different areas in this shadow tower are going to end up being dedicated portals, and by dedicated portals I mean the difficulty of the portal themselves. So anytime you end up opening this shadow tower portal right here, it's always going to end up being, why is it ultra? Okay, that must be because of my mod. Normally these portals would all end up being normal mode, and then over there would be hard mode, over there would be ultra mode. The difference being is that when you create your own portal and throw them in your club worlds, you can just choose the difficulty. But I do have a mod for my shadow towers, so that's probably why it just automatically defaults to ultra and blanks out the other ones. I don't know, it's just kind of glitchy. There's going to be the leaderboard, which is, I don't know, a lot of it's run by cheaters, honestly speaking. Not to say that anybody who gets on the leaderboard legit, you know, good for them, but the leaderboard, quite literally, if you end up beating Daughter of the Moon and getting into the top 100, I think, for Daughter of the Moon kills for the week, you'll end up getting a purple name for that week, and that's pretty much all that you get from being on the leaderboard and going through the speedruns. Now, the way that shadow towers are going to end up working is linear fashion, from the weakest boss all the way up to the final boss. The trick that you can see that we've done right here, where I've killed Daughter of the Moon, is because the weekly reset is going to end up being on Monday. So what most people will end up doing is they'll end up opening Daughter of the Moon, get all the way to the boss room, and then you simply wait until the Trove weekly reset hits, have everybody relog so that the map ends up resetting, and then you're already at the boss room, you're already ready, but then you can end up getting the kill for the boss, because incidentally, you can only end up defeating these bosses once per week. You can repeatedly fight them over and over, but the main rewards you get out of all of these bosses, you are not going to be able to repeatedly farm, unfortunately. So all of the bosses up to Daughter of the Moon are going to end up giving you Titan Souls, and then finally when you end up getting to Daughter of the Moon, that's going to end up giving you Lunar Souls, as well as Despoiled Divinity, which we'll talk about those in a little bit here, okay? So there's going to end up being various bosses, from Spikewalker, Weeping Prophet, Vengeful Pinata. There is already going to end up being a power rank association to each of these. Hydra is pretty much when it starts getting super duper hard, and Dreadknot is probably the hardest boss in the game, which is hilarious because Daughter of the Moon is the final boss, but funny enough, is not actually as hard as Dreadknot. Now, Dreadknot's difficulty most of all is just because of the tactics of actually fighting the boss, and I mean, maybe we'll end up covering each of the different bosses a little bit later in the video, but for now, I just want to focus on the rewards and the various items that you'll get out of doing all the shadow towers. Honestly speaking, there's not too much of a strategy for fighting any of the bosses, but maybe we can hop through a normal portal just so I can give you guys a bit of a taste. So as you're going through shadow towers, you will end up actually getting these shadow shards. So It's a crafting material that you'll end up just getting from completing the Shadow Towers. And then on certain days, there's going to end up being Shadow Tower Day on Monday. You'll actually get more shards and fragments. So you'll use these Shadow Shards to craft the Shadow Cache. The Shadow Cache can end up containing a couple rare items. There's some mounts, there's dragon fragments, there's shadowy wings. But ultimately, you're going to be getting these most of all for the Hearts of Darkness, which is a very important crafting resource for the rest of the game. And is one of the detrimental resources in order to end up crafting gem augmentation items, which will quite literally increase the stats of individual stats on each of your gems. You still follow me here? It's not as complicated as it sounds, okay, guys? I promise. But you can also use the Hearts of Darkness if you're earlier on in the game to end up crafting a plethora of mounts, allies, and even some costumes for certain characters. You can actually buy Hearts of Darkness on the market. They are tradable, which is great. But because getting them out of these boxes is going to end up being quite difficult, I don't know whether or not it would be more profitable for you to just farm for Flux and buy the Hearts of Darkness. Honestly, that would probably be faster than just grinding for them yourselves, but I don't know. I mean, you can end up actually trading these shadow caches as well, so you could just go for that if you want to. But there's way too many things for me to end up covering. I've already got other videos, and I'll put a card in the top right-hand corner of the screen linking to the videos that show off all the different Shadow Tower stuff. But these are the items that cost Hearts of Darkness. Titan Souls, as I mentioned before, are going to be gotten from defeating all of the bosses, and you can only get Titan Souls once per week. Same with the Lunar Souls and Despoiled Divinity. I'll show those off when we end up fighting the bosses. But ultimately, you can spend Titan Souls for even more Shadow Cache. I don't recommend it. Titan Treasures can end up containing a lot of Flux. I mean, I can literally make like so many of these because I've got all my Titan Souls saved up because I never spend them. Shaper Stars, I forget whether or not these are actually even useful anymore. They used to be a requirement in order to end up getting... what was it? You needed these in order to level up your gear back in the day, but they ended up changing it. So now they've set it so that use this key... What was it? Use this key on an Everdark vault. Okay, so it's pretty much, this is going to end up being a key that you'll end up using in the Everdark. There's no reason to go any higher than U8, by the way, because U8 and U9 both literally end up giving you the same stuff. But you can end up using a class gem key in this world to end up opening the boxes and gain your hands on a class key. Otherwise, I guess you can end up using a Shaper Star to end up just getting Empowered Gems. Honestly speaking, I always just get Empowered Gems from Empowered Gem boxes and have all of them anyway, so I literally haven't used this item since it changed its function. I only ever used Shaper Star keys, or Shaper Stars, when they were associated with gear, so... If somebody could correct me in the comments of what exactly this stupid thing does, that would be great. I'll try and remember to pin your comment. It would be very helpful. But you can also end up spending your Titan Souls on some allies, some sales for some dumb reason, and a couple really cool Shadow-themed costumes, or Shadow Tower-themed costumes. So these are actually costumes based on the bosses for different classes. You need it all for mastery, pretty much, right? But again, with Titan Souls being a time-gated resource, it means it's going to take you a long time before you end up getting all this stuff. My recommendation, go for everything but the renewable resources up here, just because getting all the costumes and stuff, that's going to be quite a bit of mastery. Same with getting all the different sales, because I think they're all actually the same mastery. Anyways, moving on to the Lunar Souls. So with Lunar Souls, it's actually a little bit different than the Titan Souls. I guess I should mention this now while I've got your attention. So the different difficulty that you end up completing a Shadow Tower boss is going to net you different rewards. So they do actually kind of work retroactively. And by that, I mean, if you complete Ultra Spike Walker, then you don't have to complete Hard Spike Walker or normal difficulty Spike Walker. It's going to count for all three. Same with if you end up completing Hard Spike Walker, you won't have to complete normal Spike Walker, and then you would have to do Ultra separately. It only works for the lower difficulty. So if you can go through Ultra Towers, that pretty much is going to cover everything. And the point is that if you complete normal Spike Walker, for example, you'll get some Titan Souls. If you complete Hard Spike Walker, you'll get additional Titan Souls, and if you complete Ultra Spike Walker, you'll get even more. So It pays for your own time to end up just going through the bosses on ultra mode if you can, or at least the highest difficulty possible, because then you don't have to retroactively do the other difficulties. Now, speaking of the different difficulties, there's going to end up being a Shadow Key mold here, and these are going to end up quite literally being Shadow Key fragments, Moon Key fragments, and Eclipse Key fragments that you'll get from normal Uber worlds, just from defeating dungeons and stuff. So, for example, with the Shadow Key fragments, you'll get them from Uber 1 and up, just from completing dungeons and junk. Moon Key fragments is U6 and U7, while Eclipse Key fragments are U8 and U9. You need each of these different keys in order to end up opening the chest at the end of the different difficulty of the Shadow Tower. So a Shadow Key, quite literally, is going to be used for normal mode boss loot, Moon Key for hard boss loot, Eclipse Key for ultra boss loot, right? So before we get to the bosses themselves, I want to mention that Daughter of the Moon is the exception in that she is actually going to give you Lunar Souls and Despoiled Divinity. It's going to be the exact same thing that I mentioned, where if you can complete Ultra Daughter of the Moon, you'll end up getting all of the rewards from both hard mode and normal mode. Despoiled Divinity being a very, very difficult resource to get, just because even on the higher difficulty, you only get one Despoiled Divinity per difficulty for Daughter of the Moon. Whereas with the Titan Souls and the Lunar Souls, those will end up giving you more and more the higher difficulty you end up going. So, I mean, I'm kind of just beating a dead horse here. You guys understand what I'm trying to get at. Do the highest difficulty possible. But Lunar Souls are unique in that they are only gotten from Daughter of the Moon, and thus are extremely time gated. So you'll be able to get quite a few items out of her for Lunar Souls. Again, though, these are going to be extremely time consuming to get, because you basically can only get each of these resources once a week. And Lunar Souls, being that it only drops from one significant boss, means that it's going to end up taking that much longer to end up getting enough Lunar Souls in order to craft all this stuff. We got Wings of Lunacy, Daughter of the Moon, mount, Daughter of the Moon costume theme for for Lunar Lancer, and the most expensive, the Luminous Paragon wings. You can also get Empowered Gem boxes. So this is where you can end up getting most of your Empowered Gems and stuff. Despoiled Divinity, again, is going to be another exclusive resource from Daughter of the Moon, and unfortunately, you can only really get 3 of them from her a week. And there is costumes for every class in the game, which is great, but each of them costs 4 Despoiled Divinity. Yeah, that's not including the dragon itself that you can end up getting from the Despoiled Divinity, which is going to cost 1 Despoiled Divinity per fragment, and if I'm not mistaken, you need like 100 or something. I think in total, all of this takes like, it either takes like 6 months each, or like a little over a year or something. I forget what the exact numbers are on how long it takes to get all these costumes, but I mean, you're essentially just spending those Despoiled Divinities, slowly end up getting yourselves more mastery. So then there's going to be Forged Souls. This is something that is remnant of old Trove. So if you get like this right here, a thrice forged Shadow Soul, you can forge out of a twice forged Shadow Soul. The names on these is really confusing, but quite literally, if you loot collect Shadow level 2 gear, you'll end up getting these twice forged souls. And then you can combine a whole crap ton of them in order to get a thrice forged soul. So on, and so on, and so on, and so on, until you end up getting all the way up to a forged stellar soul. Now, all of these resources are not nearly as valuable as they once were. They most of all were used because back in the day you could actually upgrade your gear from higher tier to higher tier. I'm pretty sure that they've since removed that. Maybe you can still forge up your Shadow gear. I think you can from Shadow 1 all the way up to Stellar, if I'm not mistaken. But it's pretty useless because we've already got Crystal gear in the first place, right? Now, I'll show you the other area that you'll end up using these souls, which is probably going to be more valuable, I guess. So on the Chaos Core crafting table, all the way down here at the bottom, there's going to be the Light Chaos Vaults, which you'll actually forge these out of Stellar and Radiant Souls, as well as those Despoiled Divinity. That's what costs Despoiled Divinity. I knew something else cost Despoiled Divinity. And Diamond Dragonite, like these are extremely expensive to craft, but at least you'll end up getting 10 of these chests at a time. The reason for this is because you'll use the Light Vaults so that you can end up getting the Light Pegasus wings, as well as the Light Pegasus mount. The Light Pegasus mount, of course, does not end up giving any mastery, but you can also end up getting fragments out of these boxes for the Light Pegasus dragon. Okay, same with the Dark Chaos Vault. These are literally going to end up being the exact same thing, a couple different resources instead, but you'll end up getting chances for the Dark Pegasus wings, which are some of my favorite wings in the game, the Dark Pegasus mount, and the fragments for the Dark Pegasus dragon. Now, here's where things get a little bit interesting and a little bit annoying. Is you can end up using those fragments as well as even more Despoiled Divinity to end up crafting yourself a dragon egg. Whoops, I should actually show you guys. So here's the egg itself. This is for the Light Pegasus dragon egg, and here's the Dark Pegasus dragon egg. And then you'll end up using the Light Pegasus egg for the Light Pegasus dragon, the Dark egg for the Dark dragon, or getting one of each dragon egg again so that you can end up crafting the combined two-headed dragon. That's pretty much the ultimate thing that you end up getting, I guess, out of Shadow Towers, but not 100% entirely out of Shadow Towers. It just, I don't know. It's kind of something that you need to do Shadow Towers in order to end up crafting, just because getting those fragments, oh boy, that's going to be ridiculous. But I don't mean to get off topic here. Before we go further too, I always forget about this guy. The Starfire dragon is the hardest dragon in the entire game to get, just because of the fact that the fragments themselves, though it says drop rarely from world bosses, most of the time they'll end up just dropping from Shadow Tower elite enemies, and it's really difficult to end up getting them to drop because you need like 100 of them. So remember how I mentioned that the Shadow Tower portals in the Shadow Tower lobby are set difficulties, whereas the ones that you put in your club worlds are going to be different? That's because if you go to the builder's crafting bench, you go to the portals tab, and then right down here is going to be Shadow Tower portals. So you'll be able to literally just place these down in your club world at any amount that you want, and then in these portals you're just literally going to be able to choose the different difficulty in order to fight the different bosses. So let me actually just hop through normal mode here and try to show you guys a brief example of what each of the bosses can end up doing. This is going to be described as a Shadow Tower dungeon. There's a Shadow Tower arena and a Shadow Tower dungeon, both distinctly different from one another. The Shadow Tower dungeon quite literally is going to act like a dungeon. So there's going to be lots of enemies in here. Any of the bigger, fatter enemy types that you can see, like these guys right here, those are elite mobs. They can end up dropping Binding Darkness, but they also can end up actually dropping gear. So in some of the higher difficulties, if you're an Ultra and stuff, it might actually pay to go out of your way to repeatedly farm a Shadow Tower over and over and over again, just because maybe it has a lot of elite enemies, right? And then ultimately you're going to end up being set with two different challenges. So that one right there is just the Cursed Skull. That's just going to be a bunch of enemy waves. And then the next one is going to end up spawning that big shadowy Chungus warrior type thing, right? And then ultimately you'll end up getting yourselves the chest, and then you'll go into the next Shadow Tower portal. And coincidentally, this is a Shadow Tower arena. So this is actually based on the old school design of Shadow Towers. Honestly speaking, I don't know how long it's going to be before the Trove developers are going to change Shadow Towers, but they do actually plan on doing it, because apparently, this is just a side note, I'm not trying to ramble on you guys or anything, but apparently the way that Shadow Towers work right now is very chaotic, because basically anytime we end up opening another Shadow Tower portal, it's actually lagging out the servers because it's creating multiple different instances. And as far as I know, what they're planning to do later down the line is maybe have like one consecutive dungeon that will end up being a final fight with the boss itself, or something to that effect. We'll see what happens. But this is very, very simply put going to end up being one Cursed Skull with a ton of waves of enemies, and you're just going to end up having to fight your way through all of them. These guys right here are actually the strongest enemies in the game. They just hit so hard. The Licorice Lashers that you saw, which got obliterated because I'm on normal mode, those guys are really tanky as well, just because the way that they work is when they're doing a spin attack, they actually will end up being almost invulnerable to damage. And all of these enemy types you can actually end up finding out in the normal world as well. These are just going to end up being Shadow Tower themed variants. Now, after you end up completing the third dungeon, arena, whatever, they're going to end up being random every week, but ultimately you're going to have to complete 3 different challenges before you end up finally going through the fourth portal into the Shadow Tower boss room. And then here we go. This is going to be the boss room with Spikewalker. Now, the way that it's going to work is as soon as you end up activating this Cursed Skull, the boss is going to end up spawning, and each of the Shadow Tower bosses is going to end up having a unique plethora of different abilities. Spikewalker, more recently, whoops, Spikewalker more recently ended up getting his hitbox fixed, so he's way easier to kill, which is great because back in the day it was not very fun. So if you, for whatever reason, don't end up having any Shadow Tower keys on you, you can always end up crafting them in this mold here. Or you can end up going through the exit portal to end up grabbing them out of your personal chest if you have them in there, and then go back into the portal. And then this is going to be the chest that I mentioned previously, where as soon as we end up opening this, we're going to end up getting a various amount of loot, and you'll see in the bottom right we also got 1 Titan Soul, and that's because I'm actually doing this on the normal difficulty. Now we can actually go through the Shadow Tower again and repeat it just so that we could open this chest. We won't end up getting a Titan Soul from it, but you will continuously be able to get loot out of these. And back in the day, this was actually one of the most effective methods of farming for better gear. Of course, now we've got crystal gear over in the GEODE topside, so there's not really much purpose for it. And then you can just continue onward. You could actually just open up the next boss and the next boss and the next boss. So I'll show you guys what each of the bosses kind of has for their abilities. Spikewalker wasn't really the best example, but he's got some moves where he can start rolling on the ground, stomping and leaving spikes on the ground. I mean, he's not really that difficult a boss, but I know he can end up being a bit of a chore, especially if you're earlier on in the game. Another thing I wanted to mention briefly, just in case you're going through Shadow Towers and you think that this one might be playing to your advantage, this particular arena. Back in the day, lava actually used to end up hurting enemies. It doesn't anymore. There was actually some really cheaty tactics that players could use. I'm guilty of using it myself, where you would lure enemies into the lava just because of how tanky they were, and then they would slowly end up losing more and more health. They've since nerfed that a long time ago, so just in case you're sitting there thinking, oh, I've got an idea, it's not gonna work. Another thing to mention too, and another big reason you might want to end up farming through Shadow Tower bosses, is because upon opening their chest, each of the Shadow Tower bosses will actually have a very rare unique mount that you can get from them. Maybe I shouldn't be on normal difficulty, because these guys are just killing themselves with my damage reflection or whatever it is, right? But anyways, anytime you end up opening these chests, you have a chance to end up getting the mount. There is also going to end up being some badges tied to Shadow Towers, so you quite literally will have to go through Shadow Hydra and Shadow Dreadknot, or Shadow Tower Hydra and Dreadknot. And the thing that sucks about these badges is they don't actually work retroactively, so you will have to complete Shadow Dreadknot, for example, 300 times on normal difficulty, and then individually complete it 300 more times on hard mode, and then an additional 300 more times on ultra difficulty. You can't just do 300 on ultra and then it works retroactively for all the previous badges like it should. I also want to mention Binding Darkness. If you guys want a bit of a bigger explanation to what Binding Darkness is and why it's so important to the game and re-rolling the stats of your gems, I'll put a card in the top right that links to my most recent gem tutorial video, because it doesn't really fall under the category of something for Shadow Towers, more so for gems and end game. So even though I'm giving you guys a pretty poor example of these bosses, once you get to Vengeful Pinata God, things get real, because this guy, as you end up lowering his health, and as you end up lowering the health of each of the bosses, they'll end up changing up their tactics ever so slightly, most of all just getting more aggressive. With him, that was another poor example. The weaker he is, the more minions he'll end up summoning, which is the real trouble of actually beating Vengeful Pinata God, because eventually he just has so many minions that it's really difficult to hit his hitbox instead of hitting all the other enemies. Not to mention, if you're trying to jump in the air and like avoid all the shots and projectiles of the different Pinata minions that he'll end up summoning, you are literally going to feel like a ping pong ball, dude. It's gonna throw you around left and right. Now, I'm really hoping that I don't accidentally end up one-shotting this thing, but Hydra, I mean, I already have individual videos talking about how to solo Hydra, because in short, you're gonna need a ranged character. Ranged characters are going to end up being detrimental to defeating Hydra, because Hydra is one of the only bosses that is absolutely static. So it's just stuck up on the wall, and the way that it works is each of the different lava blocks that it throws down, the irony is that the acid blocks, the irony is that the liquid itself isn't what's causing the damage. It's actually where the bubble video effects are. So you can see there's bubble video effects here on the wall. So if I stand in this, I'm actually going to take damage. damage, even though the liquid is actually down on the floor. The other thing that this boss is going to do is continually spawn these little minions, just indefinitely. And Gunslinger is going to be your best bet because of your nice slow fall, but for the most part, you're just gonna go back and forth and just try to avoid the different acid projectiles. The way that Trove's hit detection works as far as projectile is concerned is the boss is always going to shoot where you're going. So what you'll do to kind of deke out even normal enemies in the game is you'll hold one direction, and then when the boss's projectile is in the air, then you'll end up changing that direction. It takes a little bit to get used to the timing of it, but ultimately is going to end up being detrimental to fighting a boss like this. Most of all, if you're trying to solo it. Even if you're fighting it in a group, you're gonna have to have a pretty decent enough group. Now let me see if I can just barely weaken it, just carefully here. Oh god. So when it gets weak enough, it's actually got a vortex of doom where it'll pull you right under it. And if there's any acid blocks on the ground, obviously you're going to end up taking insane amounts of damage. I mean, this is normal mode and this is hurting me. Ultra mode, you pretty much just get one shot. It's going to drain through your pots, which I guess I should mention as well. Death Defying is your friend. So is Unyielding Emblem if you can handle getting rid of Sure Strike. And then you're going to have to use Arcane or Martial depending on the damage type that you end up doing. But Hydra is annoying. It's probably one of the harder bosses in the game outside of Dreadknot being the absolute baller of the game. Which, I mean, here we go. Now, as I was saying, certain characters are going to have distinct advantages over others, most of all just because the game is unbalanced. So I've already got other videos, more particularly I'll put an R card in the top right that links to my personal favorite for the strongest classes in the game for Shadow Towers, because Shadow Tower classes are a little bit different than ones that you'll use for speed farming out in normal adventure worlds, because normal adventure worlds damage comes second to movement speed, whereas in Shadow Towers damage is absolutely everything. So here's Dreadknot. He's probably the most complex boss in the game. The most difficulty is going to actually come from that stupid laser that he shoots, because the projectile is almost instant and going to cause tons and tons of damage. When he's got this barrier up, he's invulnerable to magic damage, and then there's going to end up being another barrier that he'll put up that's kind of like a warning shot type of thing. Hopefully he'll end up doing it for us, but he might not because I'm the only person in here. But the other barrier he'll put up is against physical damage. So the best tactic I can give you guys is you're going to damage this guy while slowly strafing around him. Because periodically he'll stop to end up doing these kind of more difficult to, I don't know, stronger attacks. There, that's the physical damage reflection. So I can actually damage this guy right now. I want to see if I can hopefully, I want to get him weak enough so that I can end up getting him to do his nuke move. I really hope that I can end up doing that. So the fire on the ground, that's going to be pretty much as deadly as the acid that Hydra ended up throwing down. And any minute now, hopefully, he's going to end up doing his nuke move, which is basically a one-shot kill move to everybody that's in the entire arena. Usually he'll end up jumping into the center. Is he doing it now? No, he's not doing it now. Come on, dum-dum. Ah, dang it. He'll jump to the center, the whole ground will turn red on the screen, and there's only going to be a couple areas of safety from the attack. So you actually can be safe when you're standing in each of the different four corners. Thus, ranged characters will end up usually being your best bet. If you time it properly, you can either use the Unyielding to tank out the damage, because when Unyielding is active, you're invincible during that frame. Or if you've got the timing down, you can actually do your shift dodge, and if you time that just right within the animation of the explosion itself, you will end up avoiding damage. But it takes a little while to get used to it, especially if it's your first time fighting that guy. This mount right here, which I of course have modded into Thomas the Tank Engine, this is actually the Dreadknot mount. Even though it looks like Thomas, it is actually this big of a mount, which is probably like one of the coolest mounts in the game. But I've got other videos talking about that again. Anyways, let's go to Daughter of the Moon, and then we can call it a day. Now we're finally at Daughter of the Moon, ladies and gentlemen, and even though this boss isn't necessarily as strong as the Dreadknot, it is cool AF, son. Like, this is such an awesome arena. You can even end up seeing the moon way up in the sky. I honestly wish that there would either be like a fight on the moon, or maybe the moon would end up crashing down halfway through the phase of the boss or something. But this is why there is this little moon icon up on the top of the Shadow Tower that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, because it's all come down to to this. Now, I do have a mod that changes Daughter of the Moon into Moonlord, and I'm desperately going to try my best to get this boss to do what I want it to, okay? I want to very purposefully not kill it too fast, so that's why I'm going to try and be on my candy barb. As soon as you activate it, Daughter of the Moon is one of the only bosses that has a crap ton of phases, right? So there's going to be this phase right here where she just kind of chases you down and does various melee attacks and such. Let me actually see. Okay, good. I'm not doing that much damage. And then eventually, as we're attacking her more and more, we're going to break off different pieces of her armor. When she gets to about this phase, now she's actually swapped out to using her gun. This is pretty easy to dodge. I mean, she's got like a couple melee attacks, but for the most part, you just juggle back and forth to avoid the range damage like I mentioned previously. You know, dodging ranged attacks in Trove is fairly easy. Get her a little bit weaker. She'll throw the gun down. Now, the gun itself, this is actually her most deadly phase, I would argue, because the gun itself is going to be causing tons and tons of damage, especially if you're an Ultra. It's pretty much going to be a one-shot. So as soon as she gets to this phase, you're going to want to lure her away from her gun so that it's not causing any damage to you. And if I can get her to do that move right there, avoid it like the plague, even if you have Death Defying, that is going to one-shot you, okay? There's some weird tricks that you can do to avoid getting one shot from that move, but it's usually just very glitchy. It's supposed to be a one-shot move. But let me see if I can end up getting her to her final phase here. Yeah, there we go. So this is where she's Goku. This is like the easiest phase in the entire game. Causes lots of damage, but for the most part, you can literally just stand in her face, slightly step to the left when she's going to end up using her laser attacks. Or there's going to be the chakra. That's probably the only thing that will potentially end up causing damage to you if you don't destroy them in time. And the funny thing is, the chakras actually act as enemy entities, so you can actually end up getting items from defeating them, and you can even just slowly wait and wait and wait, dragging out her boss fight until there's like hundreds of chakras on the ground. It's really, really funny to do, but these laser shots are going to end up being extremely deadly. All you gotta do is just slightly step to the left and just get good at understanding her positioning, because depending on who she's aggroed to, she's going to end up doing these attacks. Now, even that little Hadouken, you don't have to even move for that one. You can literally just stand there and tank it, right? But this one, you kind of got to step to the side. There's also going to end up being these kind of gas clouds exploding all around us. They used to be a lot deadlier, but not anymore. Back in the day, they would actually leave a projectile acid or smoke cloud on the ground, and those would slowly fill up the entire battlefield, making her a very, very difficult boss to end up dealing with. But since then, it's actually gotten a lot easier. And then finally, last but not least, you'll end up opening this box, and like I said, you'll end up getting some pretty good gear. Obviously, the gear quality is going to increase based on the higher shadow towers, because the higher the shadow tower, the higher the difficulty. Just even in normal mode, you know, Daughter of the Moon shadow tower is going to end up being at a higher difficulty than the rest. Thus, it requires a higher power rank, 900 power rank versus 250 power rank. And I've already got my Lunar Souls for the week, so that's why we didn't end up getting anything from her. And I think that pretty much covers everything. Hopefully, this video wasn't too long. I'm guessing that I'll be able to cut it down to maybe about half an hour or something like that for you guys. And more important than any of that, I hope that you found this video helpful. I know it's been high on demand for a long time that I do an updated video on shadow towers, and I do have a lot of other tutorials on my list of things to do. I've just been so busy with so many other things, and in all honesty, these tutorials to me are just upgrades of previous tutorials, so it's not really the most inspiring thing for me to end up making a video on, which is my lame excuse at why it took me so long to end up making this video, because I intended to have updated tutorials for everything over the course of 2019, but well, time just flew by, didn't it? Thanks for watching though. Smash like, sub for more, buy some of the, I'm not wearing a merch shirt, buy some of the merch. The hat's the merch. Yeah, sign on, stay up gamers.